The Joe Rogan Experience.
Your Instagram is hilarious, by the way.
Instagram?
It's very, excuse me,
don't have
Twitter.
Instagram.
Your Twitter.
Okay.
I get them confused sometimes. Your Twitter feed is really good. It's
try,
both
but-
insightful but also very funny.
Yeah, I try to play both sides, but the problem is like, you know, I think today there's a bit of a if you're a girl and you're kind of funny, there's a bit of a sense that like people don't really take you that seriously. So I've been told to tone down on jokes.
Who's telling you that?
Well, I'm also, you know, I run
Yes.
a major nonprofit organization, and
Do you want to tell everybody what it is or keep it on the down low?
no, it's a really, well, it's kind of right up your alley. You know, it's a organization that really tries to promote pluralistic thinking, and you know, basically exporting ideas to the part of the world that it's often censored, and you have narratives that are just not, you know, not exposed to. People are not exposed to in the Middle East. So, you know, we thought, you know, we spent like what, $8 trillion on the war on terror, and what was the results? Right, like we marched in and said, like, okay, we're going to bring freedom and democracy to people, but if there were no cultural institutions to kind of nudge people to understand why they should value freedom and democracy, is it really a surprise that it failed to take root there? So that's what, you know, we basically, the organization's called Ideas Beyond Borders. And it's kind of self-explanatory. You know, we basically take, acquire the rights to books that are not available there, translate them into Arabic for free, and then we just like load it up on the library site. Anyone can basically access that, download it. And we do Wikipedia too. So like 10% of all Wikipedia is in Arabic, English Wikipedia. And so we basically try to, you know, like, for example, George Orwell doesn't exist in Arabic, right? So like if you look it up, would you even understand what the word Orwellian means?
Right.
Yeah.
So how did you get involved in this?
My co-founder is an Iraqi refugee, and he grew up under Saddam. And I met him when I was in grad school, and I was really compelled by what he was talking about. You know, just like as somebody who grew up in Singapore too, we don't really have freedom of speech, right? So the issue was that, like, for me, I just felt like growing up, I was kind of like, all right, you know what? My issue is that, like, there was no freedom of thought, freedom of speech in Singapore. The government just kind of controls everything. I just think it's part of the human spirit, you know, that if you say you can't have something,
Yes.
there's an old Arabic proverb, that which is prohibited is always wanted.
Yeah.
And
it's a
whatever
good-
you kind of like, you just drive it underground if you try to ban it. So it's
Yes.
the whole spirit of punk rock, of like F you to the system, and that just lies in almost, you know, every human heart. We actually see that with our books, for example. You know, a lot of books are actually like transmitted on these Telegram groups in Arabic. Books like that Sam Harris writes, you know, Richard Dawkins. These kinds of ideas that are really super censored in the Middle East. So you know, that's kind of the gap that we're trying to plug right now. It's that since books are not available in that language, it's, you know, I think there's this crazy statistic. More books are translated between English and Spanish in 1 year than English and Arabic in 1,000 years.
Wow.
It's kind of crazy.
That is kind of crazy. So the exposure to those ideas.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
And the only other option is get these people to learn English, which is a far more difficult task.
Of course.
Yeah.
And you know, your average person living in, say, Syrian refugee camp isn't going to learn that quickly.
Right.
You got to meet people where they are, right? So I think the statistic when we first started, 10% of English Wikipedia was actually in Arabic, so, which means that every time, like, for example, let's say you're like, oh, Jamie, go Google this, right? And you expect an answer. It's just at the tip of our fingertips. It's so baked into modern life now. We don't even like think twice about it. But imagine if, like, you live in, I don't know, say Saudi Arabia, and like, okay, let's just Google it. 10 out of every 10 times, one time there's no answer because the page doesn't exist, or, you know, it just, the word feminism doesn't exist in Arabic, so you can't look it up, or secularism doesn't exist. It's kind of, it's, how do you expect people to kind of break out of their mindset, of their indoctrination? You know, And it's not we're not saying like this is a top down thing, like you have to read this. It's that I just want to live in a world where being ignorant is a choice for everyone. Because it's a choice for us. Like let's say like right now you're like dumb and just like basically you spend your nights watching The Bachelor or like whatever it is. It's like
I know some people.
I do too. I do too. That I know I'm judging, but I know.
Oh, listen. They also are into interesting things, but I know some people do consume mindless nonsense. My friend Cam,
but
he watches The
exclusively.
Bachelorette. He does. I'm calling you out.
He's
Cam
shaming
Haynes.
him.
Yeah, you watch that shit, bro.
Which one, the female one, Bachelorette?
He watches both of them.
Oh God. I only know that's still going on because I'm at the checkout line in the supermarket. I'm like, why is that there? Like,
it's so strange that people are even interested in that.
I know.
It's a weird thing. Very weird thing. Yes, that ignorance would be a choice. Would be nice.
Right.
Yeah. So what you're saying is that these parts of the world, one of the problems of getting them to shift their perception of the world is that they're not exposed to all the great works. They're not exposed to the
different ideas
and different debates.
And they have a monoculture. So monoculture because of society is they have religions, they have ways of life that are just so deeply entrenched, right? And then you also have a really, really heavy censorship, both from your authoritarian government and also from your religion. The first word, for example, the first word in the Quran is actually read.
Really?
But they really mean just read this one thing. And, just the sort of like habits of a free mind are not really cultivated. And also when you're taught, growing up, not to question things. And in part, I understand because I think when you grow up in an Asian household with like, tiger parents, there's this sense of like, you don't question my authority, So it permeates culture from a very, very young age. And imagine like if you kind of grow up in that environment, you're going to internalize all those things. And that's why it kind of, it follows you over time. So when you were in school, you're taught no questions. It's not like here where it is like, there's no such thing as a stupid question, Chad. There are in Asia. Like
there's
you're
definitely
dumb.
stupid questions over here too.
But you're at least told that
we're giving Chad a break. Yeah. But I understand what you're saying, and that must be really interesting for you to go from this one fairly restrictive environment to a fairly open environment.
Correct.
And did that shift that happened in you and being exposed to all these different ideas, did that spark this desire to help other people sort of expand their ideas and what they're exposed to?
Yeah, because, I felt like a fish out of water growing up in Singapore. I was always the person that, like, the teachers had to call. Like, your daughter's asking too many questions. She's disrupting the class.
What kind of questions?
I don't know. I went to Sunday school, too. I was that kid who was just like, excuse me, but why do the dinosaurs, why is it in the Bible that the dinosaurs and human beings walked, basically like days apart when like we know from science that, it was millions of years and fossils.
Did they get mad at you?
Of course, yeah. No, they were like, just keep her out of, we just rather her not come to Sunday school.
Really?
Yeah.
No answers. There was no one that tried to like sort it through and say, listen, must be that God was testing people, and this is why. That's
what my mom would say.
Really?
But in class, it's just, it's how there's no culture of dialectics of having dialogue and refining your positions. Is that it comes from authority, right? This is a very Confucian culture. So it's like, well, I am your teacher, so it is the way it is.
Right.
And okay, that's one level of it. And if you say grow up in the Middle East, asking a question could be death. Right? If you even remotely, like say in Saudi Arabia especially, remotely reveal that you might be having atheistic thoughts, that's death. So it's like we're talking about different scales and degrees of censorship and consequences for that. And I think when I met my co-founder Faisal, I was like, okay, I guess I had issues with the country I grew up in, but for him he ended up almost being killed by Al Qaeda for just like starting a blog talking about the importance of secularism and countering violent extremism.
Really?
Yeah, that's how he came here as a refugee. So I'm like, oh shit, maybe there are,
How did he almost get killed by Al Qaeda?
Well, because when the U.S. invaded Baghdad, he was living in Baghdad at the time, and Al Qaeda took over his neighborhood once there was a void. Saddam was ousted, right? And he was kind of like roaming around and like telling the U.S. Army certain things. Like, okay, like this is where Al Qaeda is. This is a cell. My friend here has been like radicalized, and Al Qaeda knew. They put him on a hit list, because he was not sympathetic to their cause, and so he ended up on a death list. His brother was killed. Just horrible story. Bridget actually recently interviewed him on her podcast. And I get the sense that, like, oh, shit, like, the consequence of saying what you think there is, like, at least in my case, was just like, hey, maybe I might go to jail.
Right.
In Singapore.
Well,
but in Iraq, it was death.
I think it's hard for people in America to really grasp what that environment must be like, because we're so accustomed to this idea of freedom of speech, and it's
freedom
so
of thought,
ingrained.
too.
Yes. It's so ingrained.
Yeah.
Rebels are appreciated and tolerated here. They're rewarded.
Exactly. Yeah, it's the whole maverick thing. I think, as long as America still can celebrate mavericks and not just tolerate them, but actually celebrate them, we're going to be fine, right?
Yeah.
And
hopefully.
Hopefully.
The thing is that if it exists the way it exists in other parts of the world, it can exist like that here. Like the worst cases of human behavior, when you see, any form of dictatorship or control or propaganda or control by the state or by industry, that stuff that you see in other countries is human beings in 2020.
Right.
I mean, we would like to think that our Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and all of our ideals and what this country was founded on is going to keep it from deteriorating like that, and most likely it will. But the reality is, those people in Iraq are human beings in 2020, and they are living in a completely different way than we're living right now. On the same timeline,
right.
Just things did not go well there, and they're stuck in this horrible situation where they are controlled by these religious fanatics, and they are stuck, and there's not a lot that they can do other than escape.